Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Operation White Rabbit, LSD, the DEA, and the Fate of the Acid King, by Dennis Mcdougal. Narrated by David Stifel. Prologue. Wamego, Kansas, November 6, 2000. William Leonard Pickard tensed like a gazelle, all senses alert. He sniffed the air, scanning his surroundings for movement, but remained stock still. Breathe in, breathe out. Give the adrenaline time to dissipate. Satisfied that the moment was false alarm, he relaxed, then returned to the task at hand. On the eve of Election Day at the turn of the 21st century, the courtly silver-haired chemist and his bearded sidekick, Clyde Apperson, loaded boxes containing aluminum canisters and an array of laboratory glassware into the rear of a Ryder truck outside a retired Atlas missile silo on the edge of Wamego, Kansas. The pair worked with haste and care. The labware was delicate. The canisters looked as harmless as Pringles potato chip cans, but the powder inside could provoke convulsions, delusions, even death. There was no room for false moves. When they finished loading the truck, Pickard silently directed Apperson to climb behind the wheel, and then did the same with his rented Buick LeSabre. Like a wizard trailed by his inelegant apprentice, Pickard angled his silver sedan past the chain link surrounding the former missile base, while Apperson followed close behind. They each had a walkie-talkie so they could keep in touch as they prepared to head west on US 24. Apperson was new to paranoia, but pulling up stakes on a moment's notice was routine to Pickard. For the better part of a decade, staying on the move had been as big a part of his complicated lifestyle as schmoozing with Afghan warlords, hobnobbing with Russian diplomats, or investigating money laundering on the Caribbean resort island of St. Martin. When he wasn't globe-trotting on behalf of the State Department, or pushing paper as an academic at UCLA, Pickard synthesized psychedelic sacraments on the fly, lysergic acid diethylamide chief among them. Leonard Pickard saw himself as heir to Dr. Timothy Leary, even while he slowly morphed into the Walter White of LSD. But with one crucial difference, Pickard would argue. Whereas the protagonist of TV's Breaking Bad made crystal meth, which ruins lives and kills thousands, Pickard maintained that LSD never killed anyone. Possessing it is illegal, however, and carting around ingredients and lab equipment tends to raise questions. A veteran of many a previous bust, Pickard had grown wary to the point of neurosis. An ounce of prevention was worth a ton of police confrontation. Pickard preferred the serenity of anonymity. As night fell over the fresh layer of snow that blanketed the Flint Hills, Wamego lit up like a beacon. The farm town that advertises itself as home of L. Frank Baum's fictional Land of Oz afforded the only light for 100 square miles. Once they'd driven beyond its halo, Pickard and Apperson were shrouded in darkness. They stayed well within the speed limit. Pickard saw the flashing lights before he heard the sirens. He slowed, took a deep breath, and waited for squad cars to blow past on their way to some accident on the interstate. Panic not. Obey all traffic laws, draw no attention, hide in plain sight. Only this time the cops didn't fly by. Pickard began to perspire when a black and white crept up behind, its high-pitched yelp directing the LeSabre to pull over. Instead, Pickard switched instantly from calm to catastrophic. He whipped the walkie-talkie to his lips. "This is it," he barked. "This is what we talked about." He gunned his engine. Apperson followed his lead. The chase was on. It ended soon enough. Within a few hundred yards, the Kansas Highway Patrol overtook and forced both vehicles to the shoulder. Apperson made a half-hearted attempt to bolt before falling to his knees in surrender. Pickard had different ideas. He left the Buick idling and lit out across an open field. Weapons drawn, the highway patrolman hollered, "Halt!" They followed in hot pursuit that cooled to lukewarm, then frostbitten in minutes. A veteran marathon runner, Pickard could be seen in silhouette against the horizon. He ran a broken field pattern well ahead of harriers half his age, and did a fast fade into the night. "I actually waded down streams to elude the bloodhound scents," Pickard recalled months later. "It took a while for those Nikes to dry out, and a full moon to top it all." Inside the Buick, Pickard left behind a paperback describing how to vanish from public view and establish a new identity. Police also found 2 pamphlets titled "Escape from Controlled Custody" and "How to Survive Federal Prison Camp." In the trunk were several more instructional brochures: how to obtain an international driver's license, how to file for a concealed weapons permit in Florida, strategies for surviving a police interrogation, and how to hide contraband in public places. Were there any further doubt that they had the right suspect, the cops also located a Department of Justice handbook on controlled substances in the back seat, and a catalog of surveillance equipment in the glove compartment. Fortified half an hour later by a small army of DEA agents, the Kansas Highway Patrol joined Wamego Police and a squadron of Pottawatomie County Sheriff's deputies in a full-on flashlight dragnet, crisscrossing the cornfields. Helicopters with infrared scanners and packs of bloodhounds aided in the search. When that failed, a house-to-house canvass of the rural hinterlands surrounding Wamego lasted through the night. The following morning, a farmer named Billy Taylor rang the sheriff's office. A stranger claiming car trouble was holed up in Taylor's barn out on Military Road, 4 miles west of Wamego. Taylor had found the man snoozing in the cab of his old pickup at daybreak. If it weren't for his dirty sneakers and grubby clothes, Taylor might have bought his story. The fellow seemed more like a professor than a hobo. He was cool as a cucumber when he asked Taylor to drive him to nearby Manhattan. Taylor gave him a nod, but added that he needed to put oil in his rig first. Then he called the sheriff. With neither lights nor sirens blazing this time, a squad car eased onto Taylor's property. Taylor had engaged the stranger in small talk until he caught sight of the deputies. Pickard saw them at the same time. Once again, Pickard ran off through the fields, but this time the deputies stayed in their squad car and kept pace right behind, bumping over irrigation ditches and shorn stumps of cornstalk. After 1,000 yards, Pickard collapsed, breathless. "You've got me," he told them. Tucson Federal Penitentiary, July 8, 2018. Inside the antiseptic glare of a fluorescent flooded visiting room the size of an NBA arena, contact is limited to a hug or handshake upon greeting and departure. Khaki-clad inmates sit in one set of chairs, and visitors in street clothes on another. They face each other. No touching. The place looks benign, if sterile, but make no mistake, there is violence here. William Leonard Pickard leans across a 4-foot gap that separates him from his visitor. While the guards were distracted, inmates circled round, Pickard confides. He keeps his voice low, his pale blue eyes tilted down. One inmate steps in, stabs him 80 times. His eyelids flutter. His normally low timbre hitches a notch at 80. 80 times? Asks his incredulous visitor. 8, says Pickard, pantomiming the jackhammer action of a shiv against his own narrow torso. He blinks twice, then glances away, leaving the visitor in doubt as to whether he's heard correctly. 8? The visitor repeats. Pickard leaves the question hanging, neither confirming nor denying. "It was David Mitchell," he hisses. "The guy who kidnapped Elizabeth Smart." Pickard sits back in horrific triumph. Blood everywhere. Pickard looks askance at two correctional officers kibitzing nearby. Bored at having to spend another Sunday afternoon chaperoning, the guards will clock out once visiting hours end and prisoners return to their Spartan quarters. Pickard has been in residence almost a dozen years. He has lost count of the attacks he has witnessed. David Mitchell is just the most recent. Several were far more grisly. His point: don't let the benign trappings of visiting day fool you. Federal prison is a damned dangerous place. Tucson isn't the nation's worst. The penitentiary at Florence, Colorado, 800 miles north of here, is a level 5 and houses such criminal elites as Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, World Trade Center mastermind Zacharias Moussaoui, and Silk Road Internet wunderkind Ross Ulbricht. Florence is far safer than Tucson. The difference is that everyone is locked down all the time, the equivalent of solitary confinement, 24/7. Not much room for either violence or intimacy. Pickard's home base is also locked down frequently. It has had its own set of notables. Celebrity felons as varied as ex-Black Panther H. Rap Brown, Utah polygamist Warren Jeffs, Boston mobster James Whitey Bulger, Jr., and of course Brian David Mitchell, the 64-year-old street-preaching pedophile who kidnapped 14-year-old Elizabeth Smart in 2002 and kept her indentured as a sex slave for nearly a year. According to Pickard, Mitchell is the latest of Tucson's 1,500 high-risk inmates to fall victim to gang violence and guard indifference. So was wheelchair-bound Bulger, though the scuttlebutt around the yard was that Whitey had been caught colluding with a prison employee who sold his autograph on eBay. Bulger was summarily shipped out as punishment. He was disinclined to walk the yard, but had been seen in the library, recalled Pickard. An inmate approached me one day with a note from Whitey, saying he was aware of my case and wanted to talk about his experience with LSD in 1957 at the Atlanta Penitentiary. In those days, the federal government occasionally sought drug research volunteers among soldiers and prison inmates, noted Pickard. Whitey claimed to be among them. Generally, inmates volunteering for drug researchers were not told of the substance's identity, said Pickard. It didn't necessarily have to be LSD. Could have been mescaline or psilocybin or any of a dozen other psychedelics. I told him to visit me in the library, but he never made it. Instead, in 2018, Bulger was transferred to Hazleton Penitentiary in West Virginia, where he was bludgeoned to death with a sock-load of padlocks. He was 89. So death can occur at any time for any reason, even over some personal illusion or another, said Pickard. Other than knives, locks and socks are the preferred method. I've seen more attacks than I can count. Within the last 6 months, a schizophrenic inmate who thought people were always talking about him crept up behind another who was peacefully watching TV. After the first stunning blow, the next 10 or so, full arm swings, were delivered on the unconscious victim. He's never been seen again, but the assailant returned to general population after a month or so in the hole. Any exaggeration on Pickard's part about instant unprovoked terror can be forgiven. Tucson remains a somber place where gossip runs rampant. Whether 8 or 80, a blow to the skull or stab to the gut is never acceptable, even among the world's most notorious, many of whom wound up here for committing their own ghastly murders. Arguably, William Leonard Pickard should never have been among them. A quick-witted chemist and conman with a passion for the good life, a talent for spinning the truth, and a dubious gift for mixing business, diplomacy, and neurochemistry, but a bloodthirsty criminal capable of gutting a fellow human being? Not in a million years. Nonetheless, he has learned to adapt. With 2 life sentences, Leonard, as he prefers to be addressed, ranks high in the Tucson pecking order, an éminence grise among capos and rapists. At 74, he's one of the oldest inmates. Most agree he is unlikely to ever walk free. He helps his peers with their appeals when he isn't busy himself. He meditates, exercises, does some yoga. The rest of the time he plunges into reams of correspondence, reads voraciously, and revises his self-published 654-page fantasy memoir, The Rose of Paracelsus. His latest publishing project involves an inch-thick primer on fentanyl, which argues that Leonard correctly predicted the current opioid crisis over 20 years ago, while he was still a research fellow at Harvard University. His attorney recently sent bound copies of his fentanyl proposal to all 535 members of Congress in support of his bid for freedom. He also asked Kim Kardashian to work the same clemency magic on President Trump that she did for convicted drug dealer Alice Marie Johnson. To date, his appeals have failed, but Leonard is resilient. His network of friends and admirers on the outside has only mushroomed since his 2003 conviction as the world's biggest and best supplier of lysergic acid diethylamide 25. Just was thinking this week that even in captivity I've come to know so many more than when free, he said. I say a nightly prayer for all the kind people. None would know his shadier side if Pickard had his way. He stifles the negatives while maximizing pretensions. The about the author paragraph at the close of The Rose of Paracelsus tells all that he cares to share about himself. William Leonard Pickard is a graduate of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, with degrees in chemistry and public policy. He was formerly a research associate in neurobiology at Harvard Medical School, a fellow of the Interfaculty Initiative on Drugs and Addictions at Harvard, and deputy director of the Drug Policy Analysis Program at UCLA. His interests include Victorian Edwardian literature, de-incarceration technologies, the neuropolicy of cognitive enhancement, and the future of novel drugs. He is, of course, so very much more. Leonard Pickard is a rail-thin stretch of a man who resembles a beardless Gandalf in a khaki jumpsuit and size 12 bath clogs. He might be mistaken for an underfed Zen monk, which in fact is precisely what he is. He accepted his vows in a Taos ashram nearly 30 years ago. Over the ensuing years, his frosty shock of hair has come to match his translucent complexion. Against all odds, laugh lines crinkle the sockets surrounding his eyes. I treat this place as a monastery, except that the other monks shout all day and are often violent, he quips. Even at this late date, there is no hard edge to his voice. But Zen or no Zen, Leonard yearns for all that he has lost, beginning with family. He has at least 3 children by 3 different mothers, 2 of whom he never sees. Only one son and one of the mothers ever visit. However eager he might be to leave this desolate concrete and steel oasis in the Arizona desert, at Pickard's core is ironic stoicism. A practicing Buddhist and vegan, he lays himself down to sleep each night with a Baptist prayer of gratitude that he learned at his Unitarian father's knee. His mantras are few but binding. The best strategy for survival is to blend in, make few waves, and stay busy. Were it not for the natural human compulsion to scheme, his would be a purely ascetic existence, stripped of pretense, powered by compassion. And yet hope does spring eternal. Pickard remains fit, vital, and ambitious, bent but not broken. He no longer fancies himself the lady killer he once was, though it seems he'll never get past his instinct for seduction. Taking acquaintances into his confidence comes so easily that he falls back into the routine like an aging doodah man. William Leonard Pickard remains the proverbial riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, only more so. He doesn't lie, exactly, at least not at first. But neither is he a slave to the facts. Above all, Leonard is a voyager upon the high seas of brain chemistry. What Jason was to the Argo, Leonard is to the psyche, and the oddball crew of lovers and confidants and chemists that joined him on his long, strange trip were and are, like Leonard himself, psychonauts. Part 1. Logic and Proportion. Chapter 1. Both prodigy and renegade, Leonard Pickard came of age at the very point in history when the greatest generation broke with their sons and daughters over Vietnam. Raised Southern Baptist in the North Atlanta suburbs, Pickard was born 2 months after the end of World War II into Georgia's white-bread middle class. Suits on Sunday, no alcohol, learned to handle rifles at 9, he told Rolling Stone magazine. Read endlessly. Azaleas, rhododendrons, lightning, fireflies. Many happy moments as a small boy observing paramecia under my great-grandfather's microscope. Visiting scientists from all over the world stayed with us. Much conversation. He maintained that his father practiced corporate law and his biochemist mom took her doctorate from Columbia. She was a fungal disease specialist with the fledgling Centers for Disease Control, he said. Public records imply a trickier and less romantic history, listing the elder William Pickard as a Southern Bell telephone switchman who worked his way through Oglethorpe University. He was a small college All-American when they still wore leather helmets, Pickard recalled. Boxed his way through law school as Kid Curly. William Pickard took his law degree in 1949, gaining admission to the bar in 1951. By then, Leonard's mother, Audrey Pickard, had already divorced his father. Leonard never learned why. Audrey, as a young woman, was one of the Southern belles with whom Gable danced at the opening of Gone with the Wind at the Lowe's Theater on Peachtree Street in, 1939, said Pickard. Audrey moved out of state and remarried 3 more times, working variously between husbands as a secretary, typist, cashier, and clerk. She outlived them all, but had no place in Leonard's upbringing. I received my healthy biology from Audrey, whom I barely knew, but mind and spirit came from Lucille, said Pickard. It was his stepmother, Lucille Georg Pickard, a University of Michigan biologist who preached the gospel of science. She went to work for the early CDC at the end of World War II. At the time, the Federal Public Health Agency was little more than a collection of Quonset huts located adjacent to Emory University. Until CDC put in negative pressure rooms to contain infectious diseases, airlocks aimed only inward, not outward, I had free range, recalled Pickard. I visited all the labs, the tanks where snails infected with schistosomiasis were raised, certain fishes and animals for leishmaniasis, and all the hosts for the world's great infectious killers. Honored frequently over a 30-year career for her insights into the biology of fungi, Dr. Lucille Georg kept her maiden name and her feminist identity. She was 8 years older than her husband, and the dominant presence in the Pickard household. As a distinguished researcher with public health, she had a red diplomatic passport. My father tagged along when Lucille attended international conferences, said Pickard. They traveled often to Europe in the grand old style by a luxury liner. Once my father brought home a complete espresso machine from Stockholm with all the fixins, as he would say. But then he'd shake his head with each cup and add, "It just doesn't taste the same." I did ask Lucille in later years why she married him, he recalled. She said because he's so full of life. Sometimes they'd dance together, write poems. They loved each other greatly. An early and outspoken champion of STEM education in the public schools, Lucille Pickard's most important apprentice was her stepson. "My stepmother was and has always been very much the primary woman figure in my life," said Pickard. "I spent most of my time with her, listened to her, learned from her. She was immensely gracious and very much a lady." A Ph.D. trained in mycology at Columbia University's Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, Lucille Georg Pickard explained the finer points of high culture to Leonard, as well as the rudiments of the scientific method. She made him a reader. He devoured books about the Manhattan Project, biographies of J. Robert Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein. "I remember the day Einstein died, and where I was standing," he said with hushed reverence. "It was 1955. April, wasn't it?" Lucille took him to the symphony, opera, concerts, museums, libraries, and her laboratory at CDC, which was well stocked with biologic ephemera and a huge collection of prepared slides. She brought home irradiated fruit flies and showed me how to check for mutants, colorful agar slants of spores, molds, and fungi, live samples of human placenta, and exotic glassware for measuring the number of red blood cells from a pinprick. When other moms were teaching table manners, Lucille taught Leonard how to tie silk knots in a matchbox using hemostats, mimicking the method med students use to practice suturing. On balmy summer afternoons, while other youngsters waded into the woods in search of blackberries and crawdads, Leonard took Lucille's hand and learned to see the outdoors through a naturalist's eyes. Memories, some of my earliest, as a small boy hunting chestnuts with her by streams, and being told of the plant and animal kingdoms, and that humans were animals made of cells. I learned my first scientific mouthful at her feet. Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which means the new life mimics the old life. Lucille knew the Latin for wildflowers and chipmunks, mushrooms and songbirds. She gathered bog water, petals, feathers, and bark for closer scrutiny beneath the lens of her grandfather's ancient Carl Zeiss microscope, giving Leonard a glimpse into an unseen world. Lucille was friends with the world's great mycologists, recalled Pickard. Her colleagues at CDC often came by the house, so that I was blessed with those influences. Researchers from around the world would stay, once an entire Chinese family. His father taught him discipline and the manly art of hunting. My father showed me how to shoot at an early age, 22s by 7, 12 gauge by 12. Packs of beagles with uncles, the works. I got very good with targets, as Southern boys tend to be, but put all weapons down at 15 and never looked back. Yet many of Pickard's classmates don't even remember him having parents, let alone shooting guns. They recall Leonard and his older sister Gala living with an aunt and uncle, Ed and Yogi Werner. Their upbringing was far more plebeian than that which Leonard recalls. His cousin, Dan Pickard, knew a city nerd, unaccustomed to the great outdoors. "I remember taking him fishing once on Lake Altoona," said Dan Pickard. "Lenny caught a catfish and went nuts, screaming and hollering as if he'd never seen a fish before." The one point upon which Leonard's cousin and classmates do seem to agree is that he was brilliant. "Lenny was not dumb, as you probably know," said Dan Pickard. "The boy was super smart and could have done wonders." Pickard lettered in track, shot photos for the school newspaper, and was declared most intellectual in the 1963 Daniel O'Keefe High School yearbook. He played forward on the basketball team, ran cross country, and rose to...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?